¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días, bienvenidas y bienvenidos. A nombre de la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes del Tecnológico de Monterrey y de OXFAM México, es un privilegio para nosotros darles la bienvenida a esta conversación que consideramos fundamental en estos momentos, en que estamos urgidos de pensar formas alternativas para vincularnos con el planeta, para repensar nuestra idea de desarrollo, para repensar nuestra idea de necesidades humanas y de vínculos humanos en un planeta limitado. Nos sentimos muy contentos de tener con nosotros a una de las voces fundamentales para replantear la economía desde una visión alternativa, una voz que ha tenido un impacto a nivel internacional y que nos urge repensar en nuestra universidad y en nuestras comunidades, como es Kate Raworth, a quien damos la bienvenida y le agradecemos profundamente que haya aceptado la invitación. Y para esta conversación tenemos el privilegio de contar con la directora ejecutiva de OXFAM México, nuestra querida amiga y aliada Alejandra Haas, quien nos va a acompañar, y también con el gerente académico de sostenibilidad en el Tecnológico de Monterrey, Luis Fernández Carril. Muchísimas gracias a ellos por su compañía y también tenemos como invitada especial a Carolina Escobar. Muchísimas gracias a los tres por acompañarnos en esta conversación. Les comento que esta conversación se va a llevar a cabo en inglés. Ustedes podrán seguirla a través de los canales de YouTube y de Facebook de la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes y habrá también una traducción simultánea en estos momentos a través de los canales de Pasión por la Lectura del Tecnológico de Monterrey. En este momento doy con mucho gusto la palabra a Luis Fernández para que haga la presentación de nuestra invitada especial. Gracias, Luis.
Muchas gracias, Ana Laura. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to you, Professor Raworth. Thank you for being with us today. It is such a great honor and privilege. I'm just going to give a brief introduction before your lecture for everyone. So Kate Raworth, an Oxford University economist and author, has revolutionized economic thought with her groundbreaking book, Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. Published in 2017, this work challenges the traditional economic model and proposes a new framework that integrates social and ecological considerations. At its core, Raworth's concept of the donut introduces a visual representation of a safe and just space for humanity. The inner ring of the donut represents the essential social needs that everyone should have fulfilled, such as food, water, healthcare, education, etc. Conversely, the outer ring signifies the ecological limits of the planet in terms of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and other critical environmental factors. The goal is to steer humanity into the safe and just space between these two boundaries, ensuring that no one falls short on life's essentials while also respecting planetary boundaries. Raworth scrutinizes the conventional economic growth model, asserting that relentless pursuit of GDP growth often overlooks social inequalities and environmental degradation. She advocates for a regenerative and distributive economy, one that respects environmental limits and distributes wealth and resources more equitably. The urgency of Raworth's message gains weight in the context of our present environmental crisis. Climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, resource depletion threaten the stability of our ecosystems and the well-being of future generations. The prevailing development model, heavily reliant on fossil fuels and unsustainable resource extraction, exacerbates these issues. The question arises, is the current development model feasible? Raworth's work challenges this status quo by highlighting the urgency to reassess our economic priorities. With climate change reaching critical levels, biodiversity declining at an alarming rate, and planetary boundaries being pushed beyond limits, adhering to the current growth-driven model becomes increasingly untenable. By integrating ecological sustainability with social equity, the donut economics encourages a rethinking of economical principles. Raworth's approach prompts policymakers, economists, and citizens to consider alternative models that prioritize well-being within ecological limits. As we grapple with the pressing realities of climate change and finite planetary resources, the wisdom embedded in Raworth's framework becomes not just insightful, but imperative for shaping a more sustainable future. Now, 6 years after the publication of her book, now we have the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which warns us of the increasing risks and impacts of climate change. And I quote, "Human-caused climate change is causing dangerous and widespread disruption to nature and is affecting the lives of billions of people around the world despite efforts to reduce the risks." On the other hand, the planetary boundaries framework used as a core concept in Raworth's book has been updated. This planetary boundaries framework 2023 update finds that 6 of the 9 boundaries are transgressed, suggesting that Earth is now well outside of the safe operating space for humanity. The team of scientists examined systems such as climate, biodiversity, and fresh water to determine the limits of what they call a safe operating space. The magnitude of the effort needed to address these challenges is unprecedented. Nothing less than a just global transformation across planetary boundaries is necessary to ensure human well-being, affirms the team in charge of the planetary boundaries update. As we begin to navigate through the epoch of the Anthropocene, a turbulent time of great planetary change, we must ask ourselves what kind of development is possible and what kind of transformations are required. Likewise, the problems we face are not only deeply complex, but urgent. Do we have time to ensure sustainable development with equity and justice for all? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce one of the top minds in sustainability today, Professor Kate Raworth. Welcome, Professor. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you, Anna. I'm really delighted and very honored to be here today with you. It is in one way a coming home because I worked with OXFAM International for 11 years. So I consider OXFAM definitely part of my family. And it's also an adventure of a connection with Tecnológico de Monterrey because this is a new connection and I'm really looking forward to seeing how these ideas resonate in your community and your world. So thank you. I'm really delighted that I'm joined here today by my colleague Carolina Escobar-Tello from Donut Economics Action Lab. She's originally from Colombia, currently living in Lisbon, but is a wonderful connection within our team to your part of the world. So let me talk about donuts. And I'm going to share my screen. And talk about one of the changes, as Luis was just saying, we need to change so much. And the focus where I want to bring our attention is to change the mindset that we bring when we study what we call economics. So I am a white, British, middle-aged, middle-class woman living in Oxford in the UK. And I'm 52. And so just over 30 years ago, I came to this same city to study economics. I wanted to be an economist. I believed it was the mother tongue of public policy. So I wanted the tools to help change the world that I saw, the inequality, the environmental degradation. But I was really frustrated and disappointed with what I was taught. And let me give you a 101 course in 20th century economics in one slide. The starting point is in almost every course, supply and demand. This puts the market at the center of the economist's vision. Welcome to economics. Here is the market. It makes price the metric of concern from day one. And anything that falls outside of the price contract is called an externality, including the ongoing death of the living world. Oh, that's an environmental externality. For me, this alone tells us we must rewrite our theories. The self-portrait of humanity in this theory is rational economic man. I decided he deserved a portrait, so I drew him. He would be a man with no dependents. He stands alone. He's got money in his hand. This is how he interacts with the world. He has ego in his heart, calculator in his head, self-interest, and he's got nature at his feet. He hates work, he loves luxury, and he knows the price of everything. And the real problem with this character is that being told that he is like us, we actually become more like him. He changes us. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. We become more self-interested. We become more exploitative of the living world when we depict it to ourselves this way. We must update the portrait of humanity if 8 billion people are to thrive together on this planet. And then the goal of economics. It's actually rarely actively discussed because it sits so deep. But if you listen to every politician's speech and every economist's lecture, it's growth and it's endless. No matter how rich a nation already is, I'm sitting in the UK, I'm in one of the richest countries in the history of humanity. And yet the politicians and the economists in this country, in this region, in all high-income countries, they believe that the solutions to our problems lies in yet more growth. There's something insane and impossible about that. So I believe these deep frames of 20th century economics have profoundly had a role in bringing us to the crises we face today. Extremes of global inequality, extremes of ecological breakdown. And we must start again by putting at the center of our vision what really matters. So here I offer you the one donut that actually turns out to be good for us. And you can think of it as a compass for humanity. If we think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the middle of the picture, then the hole in the middle is a place where people are falling short on the essentials of life. They do not have the resources needed for food and water, for health, education, housing, income, voice, equity. And these, I crowdsourced them from the world's governments, from the Sustainable Development Goals. So every government has already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to live in the hole. But as we collectively seek to meet our needs and our wants, we start to put pressure on life-supporting systems of Earth. We start to put pressure on these planetary boundaries that keep Earth in this balanced space that make life work on this only known living planet. And so, in the simplest of language, the goal of the donut is to leave no one in the hole, but don't overshoot Earth's limits. We need to sustain a stable climate and fertile soils and abundant biodiversity and fresh water recharging and a protective ozone layer overhead. This is what makes life work on Earth. Humans are utterly dependent upon these processes. Now, when I first drew this and published this with OXFAM in 2012, there was a very strong reaction and excitement about this picture, which surprised me. People are excited about a picture. And I realized then the power of pictures to change the way we think. At university, we so often focus on words and words and words, but pictures go into our eyes and sit in the back of our heads, and they shape what sits at the center of our vision and what's peripheral, what's visible and what's left invisible. So this donut was acting as an invitation to people who wanted to rewrite economics. Here you go. Here's the picture. I also then started looking at the images made by indigenous cultures over millennia, what they used as a way of depicting health, well-being, thriving. And I was just so struck to see that time again and again and again, the symbolic image across so many cultures around the world is one of dynamic balance. So it made me think the Western concept of progress lies in growth. This is the outlier. the vast majority of the world holds in their deep culture that progress and health lies in dynamic balance. And the donut is somehow, for me, a recovery program, a journey back towards that wisdom from a Western mindset. And I hope it serves in that role. So if the goal is to thrive in balance, we are very far from that. This was the donut published in 2017. And as Luis just said, it's been updated with the planetary boundaries are even more in overshoot. But here you can see that on all the red in the center is billions of people who still cannot meet their most essential needs. We want to eliminate all of that red shortfall from the center, leave no one in the hole. But we must do it while coming back within planetary boundaries at the same time. And that's very different from last century's economics. Last century's theories were not written to solve this problem. Last century's government policies were not designed to tackle it. Last century's businesses were not designed to contribute to the solution. Last century's lifestyles and aspirations. We need new theories, new policies, new designs of business, and new community and lifestyle aspirations. If we are going to be the generation, the global generation alive now, who start to turn this story around and come back into the donut from both sides at the same time. Now, I'm showing you a global picture, but of course we know that the responsibilities and the impacts are extremely different by nation. So here are 4 countries across the world. And you can see from Malawi, massive human shortfall without overshooting their pressure on the planet on around $1,500 per person per year. Mexico, significant human shortfall and ecological overshoot together, like quite a lot of countries. I've got here Spain as a comparison. Still some shortfall on employment, but very significant ecological overshoot. And then the United States on over $64,000 per person per year. High inequality on the inside, and that ripples across the whole society, but massive ecological overshoot. Now, we should be clear that the ecological overshoot here is not just the carbon emissions and the material footprint within the country. It embodies all the consumption, so the imported energy, the imported materials from around the world. Now, there's one country that's closer than any other to getting into the donut, and it's Costa Rica. Closer to meeting the needs of its people, almost within the means of the planet. And this should give us hope that it could be possible. Let's look at over 50 countries on this scatter plot. The place where every country should be aiming for is that green donut. That's where we meet the needs of all people, but do it within the means of the living planet. Here's Mexico. And the first thing you can notice is there's nobody there. There's not a single country that's there. Costa Rica is closest. Mexico's not far. And I invite you, next time you find yourself or hear someone else talking about developed countries, you say, where do you mean? Where are you talking about? Because here, there's not one single country that should be calling itself developed. There's absolutely nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. It undermines the life support systems on which we all depend. Now, let's also recognize that although these countries appear on this scatter plot like separate little dots, they're deeply interconnected. They're interconnected by histories of colonialism, by military and corporate power, by the trade and finance rules imposed by countries and international institutions. They're connected by resource extraction and by the current and future impacts of climate change. And these impacts tend to be created in the global north, impacting upon the global south, but of course, within that, many complexities of geopolitics. So we need a lot of transformation within and between nations. Now, the history of economic growth, what GDP growth has given us so far, is this direction. And let's recognize at very low levels of income, it makes a big difference to human outcomes when income per capita doubles from $2,000 to $4,000 to $8,000 to $16,000. Huge improvements in human lives. But as they go up to $32,000, $64,000, countries don't go into the donut, they go straight past it. And instead, that additional income seems to be transforming into ecological degradation. So this is where the pursuit of growth has taken us. Can we tell a different story? Can we create a different future and travel in a different direction from here? What if we recluster nations? What if we say that the low-income economies like Tanzania, Kenya, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, these countries must rise to meet the needs of their people? Can they do it without overshooting planetary boundaries like all nations before them? That's never been done before. Can middle-income nations like yours, like Mexico, Iran, Turkey, Russia, China, totally reorient? Instead of going straight past the donut, go towards it. Can high-income countries like mine and all high-income countries in the world reduce their impact on the planet, particularly reduce their energy and material footprint, eliminate all that red, but finally meet the needs of all of their people, because they certainly have the resources to do it? And can we rebalance? Rebalance between nations in terms of reparations, in terms of redistribution, in terms of the cancellation of unjust debt, rewriting international rules, changing who has a voice at the table. There's a lot to be done here. What will give us a starting point to actually start moving this way? I don't think it's just calling for growth, growth, growth. At Donut Economics Action Lab, we put two dynamics at the center of our vision, which we believe will be essential to making this change. And it's not often that economists think in terms of dynamics. Many economists are taught about laws, the laws of supply and demand, of diminishing returns. These are not laws. These are human designs. We need to put in place the dynamics of a regenerative and distributive economy. So we have inherited linear, degenerative economies. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then throw it away. This pushes us over planetary boundaries. We must bend these linear arrows around so that resources are not used up, they're used again and again. We separate the biological from the technical, allow the biological materials to decompose back in the soil. This is what nature has done for billions of years. But for the technical materials, like this little clicker, if you put this in the soil, it won't decompose because we have transformed the materials. So we have to mimic nature's cycles. We have to repair and share and refurbish and restore and only ultimately recycle, but absolutely minimize throwing away because there is no away. This will enable us to work within the cycles of the living world. So some examples from landscape. We've seen so many images of nature's richness being cut down, being destroyed and cleared. And actually we need regenerative land care to bring back the qualities of nature. She's still generous. She's still patient with us in so many places if we create conditions to bring back life. And on the technical side, when will we stop throwing our waste in the neighborhoods of the world's poorest people? When will we instead redesign products upstream so that they can be repaired? So that, like this clicker, I should be able to click it open and change just the piece that needs changing instead of throw the whole thing away. How do we change the way we design so we don't create waste in the first place? Let's go down to the level of a city. Removing a 10-lane highway, as you can see in this city in Seoul, and replacing it with a river and a park. These photographs look like they could be Photoshop. It's not, it's real. And imagine being there. Imagine what it's like to bring back water and life and nature to the heart of such a city, the qualities of the air and the qualities of the lives of people. And then think of these two hospitals. Which one would you rather go to get well again? The one in the UK, you can't see any living thing except for one or two people. The one in Singapore is full of life, and we know that humans heal faster when we are surrounded by nature. So regenerative design, from industrial design right down to the level of a building. So we must go from degenerative to regenerative, and we need to recognize we've inherited divisive economies that capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few, through privilege, through inheritance, through regulation, through infrastructure. There's no way we can get into the donut in such an unequal world. The number of billionaires has more than doubled in the last decade. We need to create economies that are distributive by design, meaning they share value and opportunity far more equitably with everybody who co-creates it. What could that mean? I think about housing. I grew up in London. It's a city now where some mega landlords own thousands of properties, and a young generation rising now say, I don't believe I'll ever be able to own my own home. So, and the rent is extortionate. Contrast that with Vienna, another very wealthy European city. But there, over 60% of people live in social housing. It's affordable, it's central, it's normal, it's good quality. Because 100 years ago, the city of Vienna decided that housing is not an investment asset for the wealthy. It's a human right for every resident. And so they decided to own the city's housing in a way that made that possible. But also think in Chile, you may know this example from the architect Alejandro Aravena. He realized that many people would never have the capacity to own their own home, but maybe they could buy half a house. So he designed and started building half houses that had all the water and plumbing, electricity that you needed. You could pay for your half house. And over the years, as you save up more money, you can fill the rest in. And surely by changing the design of the building, he's opened up home ownership and affordability to many thousands of families. And then let's lastly think of the design of business. We've inherited from the 20th century the idea that business is led by profit and workers are paid minimal wages with poor conditions, and the profits get captured for the owners of the company. It does not have to be that way. That's one design. It's a very dominant design, but there are others. Like this craft company in Mumbai, the man is holding a sign that says, "The workers are my boss." And the workers are holding a sign that says, "I own my fashion factory," because it's owned and governed by the employees. There are so many ways of designing business to be more distributive of the value created. So if we are to move towards the donut as nations, as communities, we believe that we need to put these dynamics into practice: regenerative design, distributive design. So this is all theory, all ideas. What was exciting to me when donut economics first came out was the number of people who said, well, we want to do this, or we are doing this. And the number of mayors and town councillors who said, can we do this here? So I'm going to take us on a little journey of imagining, what if you were to try to do this in Monterrey? What would it mean for Monterrey to aim to help humanity live in the donut? So first, to do this, we have to unroll the donut. We have to make some space between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. We need space to imagine. So let's go inside. A big question: how can Monterrey become a home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That is a big, complex question, I know. So we divide it into what we call the 4 lenses. On one side, you can see there are local aspirations here where we are, but also recognizing that every city, every town, every place is connected to the whole world. And so we have global connections of responsibility to others and how they impact us. So let me show you briefly through these 4 lenses. And I invite you to think of Monterrey, if that is your city, or wherever you are, whichever city or town or state you are in. What would this mean here? So first, how can all the people of Monterrey thrive? What would it mean? Think of health, education, food, housing. What would it mean for everybody to have a good standard? What is a good standard in your city? And who's currently not meeting it? Who's falling short? How could you think about school students? Think about members of the community in the market spaces. Think about what happens when the water runs out, something I know that your city knows much more intimately than most people in the world who've not yet experienced that direct reality. When what we sometimes take for granted suddenly becomes truly scarce. What would it mean for your city to ensure that these essentials of well-being were provided for everyone? And how could you make progress in doing that? That's the local social question. And you could bring so much here, so much. This is a public debate for you to decide as a place what this means for us here. Then we can go to the local ecological question. How can Monterrey be as generous as the wild land next door? This comes from the biomimicry thinker Janine Benyus. If she were with you, she'd say, people of Monterrey, take me to the wildland. Take me to the neighboring place where nature is healthy in her habitat. And let's admire and measure her generosity. Nature cleans the air. She houses biodiversity. She sequesters carbon. She cycles the water. She harvests the sun's energy. She regulates the temperature from the treetops to the forest floor. She builds soil by decomposing everything, and she makes us feel at home. How can we bring the qualities of nature back into our cities so that our cities actually belong here? I've drawn some photographs that I found online from your city. What does it mean to create neighborhoods that are nestled among the trees? And how different does it feel to live there rather than in a place with no trees? We know what impact the urban heat island effect has. It undermines children's learning in school. So neighborhoods without trees mean kids do worse in school. And we know those are neighborhoods full of the less well-off people. So it reinforces privilege and reinforces deprivation. What happens when the city is prone to flooding? As I know you know from experience. How can we redesign our cities and the hillsides around them to prevent or limit that flooding so that the water is absorbed, it doesn't run off the tarmac of the roads? How can we harvest the energy of the sun through growing food, through solar panels? How can we harvest the energy that's given to us every day? How can we clean the air? How can we house wildlife? What would make us feel at home? So these are beautiful ecological design questions for every place to bring nature back in so that it belongs again where it's based in the world. What would it mean for Monterrey to respect the health of the whole planet? These are the planetary boundaries. And this is the connection through the clothes you buy, the food you buy, the electronics you're using that are imported from all over the world, energy and materials. This is the red overshoot. How can you transform your city living? Transform transport with your new metros. Get more people out of the cars, onto public transport, onto bicycles. How can you transform the waste that's created? Recycle and sort much, much more of it, but limit it in the first place. And what about the industries that create global carbon emissions, but also local air pollution? These are transformations, of course, that we are making in industries in every country, in every context. to come back within living within the means of the planet. And finally, but crucially, thinking of the people who we are connected with worldwide, who stitch the clothes you wear, who pack the food you eat. Are they paid decent wages through global supply chains? And the global supply chains that purchase from your country, how are you affected by how others impact upon you as well? What happens when people are forced onto the move as migrants, as refugees, because of climate breakdown and ecological and economic breakdown? How are they welcomed? And how can institutions like a university, how can institutions build solidarity with others across countries so that when crises hit internationally, we have connections, we have solidarity, and we respond together and look out for each other? These are just a few examples of the many, many, many ways that every city is connected to and impacting upon people worldwide. So we can put these together, and this is what you get as the beginnings of a city portrait. Of course, I've just put some photographs from here, and I'm an outsider. I've never had the chance to go to your city. If you were to fill this in, it would be alive with experience, imagination, possibility, reality. It would be a completely different story, which would be amazing if it happened. So this is the beginnings, and we published this Donut Unrolled tool a few years ago. And I just want to finish by showing you a couple of examples from around the world, because this is from the Donut Economic Action Lab, the community of change makers, individuals and cities and networks and organizations worldwide. And we're thrilled by seeing people use these tools and share back what they've learned, because we learn from them. So many governments and communities have started unrolling the donut in their locality. Barcelona, for example, in Spain, created a data portrait. You can see the unrolled donut, and they've literally put data against those 4 lenses. But they've also turned it into a community conversation, because they want everybody to understand why and how they are transforming the city to make it regenerative and distributive by design. In Malaysia, the city of Ipoh is determined to be the first city in Asia to aim to live in the donut. And the mayors there have started exploring this and put it at the heart of their well-being strategy, and holding a local day for communities to get involved and to find out the ideas to understand a regenerative, distributive future. In Germany, in the city of Bad Nauheim, they invited 100 residents, chosen randomly, to be part of a citizens' assembly, and together to create their vision of what would it mean for Bad Nauheim to live in the donut, in this lovely picture they created. In Bhutan, the government of Bhutan said, this donut is the closest thing we've seen coming out of Western economic thinking to our concept of gross national happiness. So we want to use the two together, and we want to use it to think about redesigning our capital city, Thimphu. So we're working with them on that city plan. We've written about many, many different local governments and how they're getting started in many ways in this report, Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started. It's on our website, and I invite anybody to look at it if you want ideas for how could we start doing this here. But I also want to share that this is being led by community initiatives, people getting together in their own locality and starting it, because the tools are online, they're free, you can take them, you can hold your own conversation and come up with your own local insights and ideas for transforming your own place. In Birmingham in the UK, you can see from this picture the playfulness with which they're doing this work. And there's something that makes people playful when it's donut economics. It's not intimidating, it's an invitation to everybody to join the conversation. And in Mexico City, there is the Tricolor Coalition, a group of volunteers who said, we want to bring donut economics to Mexico, to our city. So they've made a wonderful video. They just invited anybody who wants to join and started saying, how do we apply these ideas here? So I invite you to find them on our platform. Or if you're not in Mexico City, maybe you could start your own initiative where you are. Let me finish by sharing with you the platform, donuteconomics.org. oxfam.org. If you come here, you can see all the local groups that exist, all of the tools that we've made, and you'll feel what we feel, I hope, which is massive inspiration from the practitioners around the world, teachers, city leaders, community members, businesses, who are putting these ideas into practice and making them real. I profoundly believe that 21st century economics is practiced first and theorized later. And so this is where economic transformation is at, with this community. So let me stop here, and I very much look forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kate. This is wonderful. And of course, it's such a privilege to have you with us this morning. I think the possibilities that you let us see, the constructive way in which we can respond to climate anxiety is much better than just the doom and gloom from diagnosis. I mean, we just issued a report 2 days ago regarding inequality and climate change, and this just feels like such a good answer to the problems that we analyze there. But I guess I wanted to start off the conversation with a couple of questions. And I think the thing that amazes me the most about the model is that you're very clear on how political all of this is. And we were speaking before we started about, how sometimes economists or, experts on fiscal policy or, people that are technical see themselves as non-political. And so there's an orthodoxy that sort of keeps draws certain lines into topics that you can or cannot question. And in your model, what you're actually saying is you're questioning, I think, the basic orthodoxy, which is GDP growth, and you're saying GDP growth shouldn't be the measure in which we see how successful we are in the world, but it is a very, very ingrained sort of measurement. And although I agree with you that there are hundreds of experiences around the world, and I loved this last leg of your presentation on how different places have done things differently. And I have many examples in Mexico that I can also share with you later. I would just like to ask you whether, and I know you've been at this for many years, so maybe this is a bit of a stupid question because it's so hard. But, have you, in all of your experience, is there a way in which you feel that it is more successful to question particularly this orthodoxy of GDP growth? Have you seen convincing arguments or other people from other walks of life making convincing arguments that GDP growth should not be the measure of success? Or to ask a question differently, who are your allies? Who are our allies in questioning this as a basis for success?
Great questions. I'm just going to very briefly respond to everything you said. Yes, OXFAM published a very important, powerful report on the extremes of climate inequality, and that the richest 1% of people emitting more carbon emissions than the poorest 2/3 of humanity. It's outstandingly shocking. It's really important that we know the stats like that tell us the reality of the world. We need that. And we need the possibility. We can't sit all the time with crisis. It's overwhelming. So we need something to be for. And that's what the donut offers. One way of having a vision of what I stand for. This is what I believe could be possible. You just mentioned sometimes economists would say some topics, oh, that's not economics, that's very political. Now you're taking a political stance. That's happened to me many times. Even when I've shown this donut to economists, they've said, "Oh, no, you're getting political. Now this isn't economics. Now you're getting, because you're showing values." Now this is a really important point. Economics is full of values. They're often unspoken, but it's political not to talk about them. it is political to say we are not talking about distribution, because what it means is you're saying, I accept distribution as it is. So, of course, it's political. Economic theory is profoundly political. When we say, welcome to economics, here is the market, that is a political move. And it's presented as if it's, no, this is objective. There are no values here. There are deep values here. And the value is placed on endless accumulation. That is the ultimate value, that more is better, and even better if there's even more. And it's insane. We have to be talking about it. That's why I realized the power of the donut, because it is very explicit about our values. We put them up front from the beginning. We respect human rights. Do you want to debate those values? We respect the ecological integrity of the only known living planet in the universe. Do you want to say that doesn't matter? Now, if we start with these values very clear, now what kind of economic system would enable us to achieve that? So we have to be explicit about the values. And now let me come to the economic growth point. About 10 years ago, when I first published The Donut 12 years ago, there've always been a little questioning of economic growth since Bobby Kennedy made a speech in 1968 in America saying GDP measures everything except that which really matters to us. But the addiction to growth, the lock into growth, is so strong that this debate has always been pushed away. And when I first published The Donut, I think people thought it was very radical. But financial crisis, climate breakdown, extremes of inequality in the world, these show us that the path we're pursuing is really not beneficial to us. We need a different vision, and just adding up the value of goods and services sold in a country in a year, that's GDP, is nothing close to the metric and the measure of what people say they actually want and value in their lives. They want a stable climate and a stable community. They want to know they have a good job. And GDP isn't going to give you those things. So I think we have many allies. In fact, I think it's quite hard now to find a parliamentarian in many countries who would defend GDP growth. Many people say, well, of course, GDP is out of date, of course. But what we need is something to replace it, right? We have to not only be in critique. If you're in critique, you're still talking about that same thing. And that's why I tried with Donut Economics to quickly critique, but focus on being propositional. And the donut is a proposition. I showed you all those national donuts, and we could totally replace GDP in terms of ranking countries. And that's why we end up with no developed countries, because all the high income countries that are doing very well on GDP, they're all in massive overshoot of the planetary boundaries. So it's always political. So I think we have many allies in the world who are ready to come with new ways of going beyond GDP, but we must undo our dependence on an addiction to GDP growth, especially in the richest of countries.
Thank you so much, Kate. And, it brings up so many questions around how governments value themselves, and how voters see governments, and how effective they are in bringing those conditions of a better life that people are expecting. But I guess I wanted to go from the very general GDP question to a very local question, because in the model, but particularly in the examples that you showed us, you bring in the importance of democratic participatory processes, where people actually build solutions together for their own communities. And that seems to be a really important part of what you value as a model of going forward and leaving behind the extractive model and going forward to a regenerative distributive model. But there is one thing that I feel is hard to achieve, particularly in a country like Mexico. And this is very country specific, but Mexico, I guess, one of our worst problems is lack of trust. And lack of trust derives from a number of things. There's a very basic lack of trust that derives from the presence of crime, and the difficulty of having a secure environment. There's also the lack of trust derived from, a certain dynamic between citizenship and government where, there's mutual distrust. So could you speak a little bit about that, about how trust interplays with these participatory processes, and how, maybe you've seen examples of how you build trust where there is no trust in the beginning?
A rich and complex issue. And let me start by saying, of course, I do not know the solution. I've never been to Mexico, and I don't claim to be able to say anything specific about your context, but let me bring what I've experienced around trust in other places, that if it's useful. Trust is obviously fundamental, that we feel that we belong in a community, that we are recognized and respected in that community, and that we could trust that people will behave in ways in the interests of the whole community. That's at the core of our pro-social behavior. That's what allows us to stop being self-interested, competitive, rational, economic man, and allows us to be pro-social, collaborative humans. We have the potential for both of those very much in us. So we need to bring about the social conditions to bring about the collaborative side of ourselves, as you said, on many, many levels. Citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy, this bringing together of the community, like I showed in the town in Germany, is a way that certainly where I am living is being more and more experimented with, partly because when governments are facing really tough policy decisions to do something radically different, like remove cars from the city center, or renationalize the water that's been privatized and very poorly used, they find that when you ask a citizens' assembly, they tend to think much longer term than the politicians do, and they are 3 times more likely to come up with really quite strongly progressive propositions than policymakers will make, because policymakers are often caught in a 3 or 4 year electoral cycle. As they sometimes say, I know all the policies to put in place, I just don't know how to get re-elected once I've done it. So there is often a trust that the citizens' assembly will think as a collective group of citizens for the good of the people, not for the hope of re-election. So it frees them from that. I think that's one reason why citizens' assemblies are gaining trust as a way of thinking. But of course, they themselves may ask, what will the government do with our recommendations? Will they actually act on our recommendations, or say, thank you very much, we put that on the shelf? So is there a trust about the role of deliberative democracy there? Let me finish by saying I hope that towards rebuilding trust in a community, the kind of tool I've just showed could be one useful small part of that. Because as you saw across those 4 lenses, it focuses on social deprivation, people living with hunger and lack of housing, lack of education, so key social issues. It focuses on the local environment. It focuses on global planetary boundaries, and it focuses on our impact on other people. Most people, when they come to these 4 lenses, they can find the issue that matters to them. It's visible. And part of trusting others is knowing that we're seen and that what matters to us is taken care of. So this framework, we hope, helps build recognition and trust in small groups of people who come together to start to make it happen. But of course, every community is embedded in a city government, in a nation, in a region, in the world. And so we're trying to make transformation happen within a much wider system that is often trying not to transform, because vested interests don't want to lose their power. So I want to recognize this is also a struggle. It's not easy. People start initiatives knowing they can't go to their full fruition, but they start them anyway, because they're determined to bring about change. So building trust is part of a much, much bigger, longer social process, we hope that the conversations that these tools enable, that the visibility to everything that matters, are part of making all issues be put on the table, everybody's voice to be heard, and bringing citizen deliberation back into the heart of policymaking.
Thank you so much. I love the way in which this becomes a way to have more democracy and move away also from, the reduction of civic space into more civic space, because that's where the solutions lie. And it's so important that you say this, because we are starting a year of elections in Mexico, both local and federal. And so it becomes really, really important for citizens to have sort of a guiding principles of what they should expect all of the candidates to speak about. And I think, depletion of resources and human rights are perfectly good, important topics that should be addressed openly.
Can I just jump in there, Alexandra? Because
Yes,
in
of
some
course.
countries, when elections have been coming up, community initiatives like the Tricolor Coalition, but in other countries, in the Netherlands, in New Zealand, they've held public meetings for local politicians, for candidates who want to be elected. And they said, okay, our vision is to live in a place that meets the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. We invite you from all the different parties to come to this meeting and explain to us how your policies will help realize this. So there's been a really nice initiative of using this framework and using these tools precisely in the run-up to elections to advocate for a new vision, so that the politicians don't just show up and say, I will bring you growth. That's not what we want. We want a different vision.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really timely to have this discussion now and to make sure that people know, they have this can be a blueprint for political discussions. And I think it's really good. I had another question for you, Kate, regarding innovation, because I think a lot of the arguments that I've heard over the years of people opposing sort of redistribution measures like, better tax collection or other things, or the very Oxfam arguments that, billionaires are a problem because they hold so much of the world's wealth and so much of the political power. But I've been questioned, and I'm sure you have too, around innovation. So this idea that innovation is fostered by some very innovative people, let's say, holding enough resources to make sure that they have the freedom to go into innovation and to come up with a cell phone. I've had many people tell me, well, if you like your cell phone, then you should be favorable to, capitalism in its rawest form, because that's where the innovation came from. So I would love to hear your answer of that question. How would you respond to sort of that point of view that innovation only comes from the possibility of certain individuals having unlimited resources to do whatever they want and come up with great technology?
I would say, well, if you like your cell phone, do you actually know where the innovations in your cell phone come from? Because it's not from individuals, private sector taking risk. The major innovations that make a cell phone work, like a scrollable screen and Siri and the smart searching and the GPS, all of the key technologies, they come from the US public investment. And actually, this has been beautifully documented by a brilliant economist called Mariana Mazzucato in her book, The Entrepreneurial State, which shows that the narrative, Alexandra, that you just said, it's a very, very popular and powerful narrative, but it's just a story. Most innovations in the world do not begin with the private sector. Many of them begin with public investment in public health and basic research, in basic technological research. And very often the private sector only comes in when the core innovations have been made, and then it's been de-risked, and then we'll take it to market. And then they make all the money there. And Mariana Mazzucato argues there's a lot of public investment in here. There should also be public return. So I really recommend her work. But I think, again, it's a very important part of the rebalancing in this story, that we should not see the state as just sort of leveling the playing field and get out of the way. I think that was a very 1980s concept. Margaret Thatcher in the UK, Ronald Reagan in the US really led that story. And now we need regulation. We need regulation to shift us from carbon intensive to dematerializing and renewable. We need regulation to make a far more distributive economy. And by the way, if people are, saying, oh, you're redistributing, the current tax code in countries, it redistributes. It just redistributes from most people to the few. Every policy is redistributive, but sometimes it's going in the wrong direction. And I'd say the rise of billionaires, it's not that the billionaire, that person is a problem, it's that it's a symptom that the system is deeply unhealthy. It's concentrating resources in few hands, and it creates a deeply unhealthy form of extreme investment. So I really disagree that innovation comes from concentrating resources in the hands of a few. Sometimes it actually creates crazy results of billionaires who start producing things or buying up things that are not in the interest of all of humanity, but seem to be far more in the interest of their own ego and their own dominance in the world. So I would argue we need much more public innovation, much more public investment. We need a return to recognizing the value of public goods, public water supply, public transport, because it's public provisioning that will enable us to provide at a far lower ecological impact in many, many sectors.
Thank you, Kate. And I had one last question, and then I wanted to open it up also for Luis, and maybe we can read a couple of questions from the audience that we have. But I have one question for you regarding care, because one of the experiences that we've had at OXFAM Mexico, particularly with a specific indigenous community, a group of women that got together and did a project on care. And when we went and saw them in the place where they live, it struck us, and this has been part of a lot of other indigenous communities' perspectives on care. They speak about care. When they speak about care, they say care is not only caring for children or the elderly, it's also about caring for the resources, because resources are also a part of this system. So my question to you would be, you went to Bhutan and you went to other countries, so this is just maybe if you could highlight some other experiences. Sometimes human rights and some frameworks feel very Western centered. So how have other communities, diverse communities around the world, reacted to the donut model? And do you feel that it resonates with people? And you've said it around the concept of the circle, but in terms of the language that you use, have you felt that it needs to be adapted to other communities that are not Western centered?
That's a great question. Thank you. So first of all, as I said at the very beginning, I see the framework of the donut. Originally, I am somebody raised in a Western mindset. And so it was created as a journey away from the Western economics that I inherited back towards a wisdom that's long held in other communities. So I think I'm going to say it starts with, it's like a clunky Western approach back towards a far more holistic thinking in other worldviews. About care is about relation, right? It's about being in relation to one another. And in fact, one diagram I didn't show in the presentation, I didn't have time, but I'll just show it very quickly here. I always start economics with this, not with supply and demand, but recognizing that the economy is a subsystem of the household embedded in the living world. And that within the economy, we have the market and the state. And we were just talking about that. Is it the market that innovates or the state? So we were just having the classic economic conversation. Is it market or state? Who should dominate? And when we get obsessed with that, we forget and ignore two other fundamental ways we provision for our needs and wants. There's the household of care, of unpaid caring labor, where we care as parents, as partners, as relatives, as children, as neighbors. and as stewards of the living world, but also the commons here, where we co-create and steward value, including in the living world around us. So to me, this is the direction of care, and it's as important, just not priced, right? This is what shows up in GDP, but this is what holds life together. So to me, care is absolutely in there. And if I take this little thing away, you can see the names of all the different roles we have as parent, child, guardian, carer, co-creator, sharer, repairer, steward. These are relations of care. And we need to cultivate the values and the skills to know how to do these well, to be pro-social humans. But also we're in relation all the time to the rest of the living world. And I think it's for the Western mind, when we talk about the living world, well, many people call it the environment. I often say, tell me how you talk about the environment, and I'll tell you what your job is. If you talk about it as natural capital and ecosystem services and natural resources, you are facing probably a government or a company. You're speaking the language of power, and you're treating the environment as like the man on the top of the pyramid. It's your Lego blocks. It's your building blocks. But if you talk about the environment as Mother Earth, the web of life, nature's gifts, you're speaking out of recognition that we are part of nature and part of the web of life and interwoven within it. And that, of course, is a worldview that comes much more richly from indigenous communities. One quote that I love from Chief Oren Lyons of Turtle Island, he was invited to, I think it was the College of Natural Resources in California, and he was invited to give a speech. And he said, what you people call your natural resources, we call our relatives. You need to get back to relationship, because that is going to be the foundation of your survival. So it's about relatedness and learning about the connections between ourselves and our families, ourselves and our communities, ourselves and all the living world and the interdependence. So I'm on my own journey as a Westerner, educated in this Western mindset. I'm on my own journey towards that relatedness. And of course, we learn all the time from indigenous leaders and thinkers and communities and histories like Chief Oren Lyons, like Robin Wall Kimmerer is another one who inspires me. And it's about bringing that relationship back in, but also, as I said, that's back with the problem of GDP. It only shows us what's bought and sold. It doesn't show us what's cared for. And that caring relationship has to be made visible in economics.
Thank you. Sometimes it feels like indigenous communities have known all along many things that we have chosen to ignore or forget,
Exactly.
and we need to relearn. So I wanted to pass it on to Luis, who I know has many questions for you, but also to let you know that we have a couple of questions from the audience. So as soon as Luis is done, we can go to those questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you, Professor Raworth, for this wonderful lecture. I just wanted to be very quick and very specific with my questions. This is what I wonder, what I constantly think about, and now that after you presented, it comes again. Professor Raworth, are the current international policies in place to tackle environmental degradation aligned or compatible with donut economics? What I'm thinking is, on the first hand, the Paris Agreement, and particularly Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that has to do with carbon markets. So this has, as you just mentioned, this has the language of power. So I have a huge it worries me a lot that the international policies that we have to tackle this environmental ceiling that you're mentioning are actually not really helping, right? And so on one hand, we have the Paris Agreement with certain elements that are shaped through 20th century economic thought. And on the other hand, the SDGs, and particularly SDG 8, which is, of course, talking about economic growth. So these are supposed to tackle, to lead us into a sustainable world with equity for everyone. So if it's written, if it is thought, if it is decided using the language of power, are they really helping to keep us in a safe space for humanity? Are they compatible, aligned with the donut economics? We just saw this year, 2023, a couple of reports, the Sustainable Development Report, among others, that we see that we're not making progress. About halfway, we're not making progress in the SDGs, and particularly the environmental SDGs. We're definitely not getting there. So, is it compatible? What do you think about this?
So you're actually tempting me, if I can, just to share one other slide that I didn't have today, but it's so relevant to what we're talking about right now. How do we envision our relationship with the rest of nature? And I think there are two, at least, right, this is simplified, but there are at least two very different worldviews that are emerging or are dominant. So which picture comes to our mind? Is it man at the top of the pyramid, or is it humanity in the web of life? Because which picture we choose will deeply connect with the language we use. Is it natural capital and externalities and natural resources and ecosystem services, or the living world, the web of life, Mother Earth and nature's gifts? Now, this is at the paradigmatic level, the language we speak, the pictures we draw. But as you just said, Luis, it takes us straight through to that. Then what do we think are the policy solutions? How do we draw the economy? The one on the left is a classic depiction in a textbook with the market at the center, resources and money going around and around. It makes almost no mention of the living world. The one on the right is the one I just showed you. Depending on the model that we then bring, what are the solutions? And as you just said, the solutions that are being proposed through the Paris Agreement, through all carbon policies, are nature is an asset. Carbon is a pollutant that can be priced and controlled and modeled, right? And we can create carbon markets. We can create green bonds. We can create payments for ecosystem services. So we bring nature into finance. And of course, in the process, we risk commodifying nature, in financializing nature, but we take power as it is. These are the tools we have, bring nature in. And of course, there's a huge danger there that then the expectations of these tools, markets should deliver returns. Green bonds give investors high returns on their expectation. Payments for ecosystem services are only worth paying, and they're only worth performing to if they're more profitable than the alternative. So now we have really gone and put the market at the center of our vision and trusted markets with the complexity of life. I see this as an emergency short-term project that some people are pursuing because it's the only tools they can see. But I also see it as a profoundly dangerous project that ultimately financializes nature and puts it into the current tools of a system that already we can see doesn't work. So my choice is to go the long route with planetary boundaries. Let's talk about boundaries. Markets don't talk about boundaries, they talk about price. Let's talk about boundaries measured in life's own terms, capping carbon emissions, capping nitrogen use, capping CFC use, capping biodiversity loss. Let's talk about, maybe one route is the rights of nature. Now we're going to put legal rights of nature. Some countries and people have been promoting that. Shall we talk about regenerative design and how do we regulate that into the way things are designed, ending inbuilt obsolescence, requiring circularity? So these are very different projects. The problem is that the market-based one is the most developed. It has the most money behind it. It has the most energy behind it. And so it's dominating. But I think the other one needs universities to invest in and say what kind of policies, regulation would make this possible. And then on the question on growth, well, yes, the SDGs were always a problem because they have inside them the pursuit of endless growth. So when I brought the SDGs to the donut in here, this is all the other, these are the social SDGs, but growth is not in there. I had to remove it. And it seems that growth is winning over achieving the social foundations, because I think our economies are still structured with a dependence upon and a pursuit of exponential growth. And that is, to me, the existential economic question of the century. How do we end our structural dependence on endless growth, which, by the way, I think was made possible predominantly by the use of fossil fuels in the 20th century? That made it look like growth is normal and natural and always coming. So build it in. And now it's stopping. And this is really hard because it also risks hitting people with extreme inequalities. But this is why I just believe every economics course in universities should be having a conversation about what if endless growth isn't possible, or what if it's not coming, or what if it's not desirable? Then how would we change our economies? This generation of students deserve to have this conversation, because I believe it's going to be a real policy issue well within their lifetimes.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more with you, Professor Raworth. I'm going to start reading a couple of questions that we have in the chat. One by Luis Gerardo Rojas, which is, you talked about how classic economics is political itself and how economists don't see it. However, I wonder if you have any insights as to helping students or people in general see this aspect. And I would like to elaborate this question a little bit more to say, we're a university here. So yes, of course, we can create a donut economics action lab here in Mexico, which will be great. But what would be the role of universities other than that? How can education systems be reimagined to incorporate the principles of donut economics and to empower future generations to think critically about economic models and sustainability? What can we do as a university with our students?
Right, great question. So the first thing you can do is to make sure that your students are aware that there are many schools of economic thought. Most economics textbooks are called economics, which makes it sound like there's just one, and this is it. And that's totally false and deceptive. Students, I really believe, have the right to know that there are many schools of thought. There's neoclassical economics, which is often the one taught. There's ecological economics, feminist economics, complexity economics, behavioral economics, institutional economics, Marxian economics, post-Keynesian economics, and. I very quickly wanted, if I can succeed in doing this, share. Oh no, it won't let me. Hang on, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you this website. It's I hope you're looking at my screen right now. This is a website called Exploring Economics. This was made. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
This was made by students who were frustrated of only being taught one kind of economics. And they've made this wonderful website where they compare the perspectives of economics. And look, you can see here all these different schools that I just mentioned: neoclassical, behavioral. Get rid of that. So 101, make sure students are aware there's many schools of thought, and you can go into any one of these and they take you, oh, here's ecological economics, here's the core ideas, here's going deeper into it, here's some literature. I mean, it's a beautiful website. So I really, really recommend it to anybody interested. It's called Exploring Economics. That's the number one. And then I think if professors can just start realizing that economics is, I think, in a phase of not something that just should be taught and learned, but something that should be re-explored together. And that professors themselves are in a phase of unlearning and relearning, and to have the humility and openness, which I think students appreciate, to say, let's go on this journey together. Let's look at different schools of thought side by side, and what are their strengths, and when would we want to use each different one? So it really opens economic thought up. And it turns it into a tool in service of life rather than what I think it's become, which is a tool in service of financial accumulation, which I think is just far too much, whether it's macro accumulation for a nation's GDP or micro accumulation for the profits of a company. Economics has been given that purpose far too much.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I wanted to because we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to sort of summarize 3 questions. There's someone asking about Milei, the new Argentinian president. Someone asking about El Salvador with their own president, Nayib Bukele. And then there's another question about Donald Trump. And so it seems like people in the audience are asking questions around those sort of political platforms that have a very particular, specific kind of economic policy that is not necessarily very well aligned with the donut economy. So do you want to talk about any of those specifically, or in general about these governments and these platforms winning elections, because they might have seemed fringe at a certain point in time, but now they are governing in many countries in the Americas?
Yes, I'm going to invite my colleague Carolina to bring some comments if she'd like to in a moment as well, because with just a reflection from within the region on this. So I'm not familiar with the president of El Salvador, but Milei and Donald Trump, when I see the way they campaign and the way they speak to the populace, there's something very clear in common. One is that they bring profound simplicity in the face of complexity. Trump, build that wall. That's the solution. It promises such a simple solution to something that people have come to realize is incredibly complex, and in which they play a role, and it helps sort of take it away. Milei turning up with a chainsaw, pulling the names of government ministries off a board. It's performative. In fact, they're both performers, right? They both know how to perform to a crowd. And it's a totally simple message. I'm just going to bring a chainsaw to government ministries. It sounds so wonderful. Just sweep it away, as if the problems will now go away. And of course, let's see what happens with Milei. But I think we've seen with Trump, the world is complex. And it requires someone who will hold that complexity, not pretend it's false and dismiss it, and bring a violent simplicity to it. So it's deeply worrying. The most worrying thing, of course, is that populations are choosing to elect these people. What does it tell us about the cognitive state of people feeling unable to cope with the breakdown of their social systems, the breakdown of the living world, that they turn to such an absurd, apparent solution? How do we come back with a more powerful story? And so in the face of this performance and the promise of simplicity, we have to hold complexity because it's real, but have to make it simple. And I'm just going to go back to the donut. There's a lot of complexity here, but at the end of the day, it's 2 concentric circles. And people get it, and they're not intimidated by it. And so I think of it as one of many, many tools in building that counter narrative that is also, people say, I have hope when I see this. I have hope, and it's not just hope for myself, it's hope for everyone. I want to ask Carolina if she wants to jump in. I realize I'm inviting you on an incredibly complex political issue, but also if you want to comment, Carolina, on the last question around teaching in universities, because this is so close to your work and your passion.
Thank you, Kate, and hi, everybody. I am the Schools and Education Lead at Donut Economics Action Lab, and I am thrilled to be able to join you today. Our intention with Kate and the organization in general was to extend and come closer to the region so that you know that there is it's a very diverse team, and that we are all available to collaborate and extend our support in whatever that you may be doing. So anything that has to do with education, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are working hard to develop educational materials that are useful from school all the way up to undergrad, postgrad, lifelong learning, that are flexible enough to be contextualized and appropriated to many of the things that you've been bringing up today. So that we know that we have these raw ingredients, but we want to open them up for you to shape them and appropriate them as they fit your context, which are very different, as Kate has explained wonderfully throughout her experience in Europe. Reflecting on all the things that have come up, the thing that I would add is that we are going through a deep transformational throughout humanity, right? A period. And I think what young generations are teaching us very clearly is that modernity is failing, and that we are desperate to find new ways of living life, of being happy, of having success, and redefining what that means. And so we can debate for hours on all these political things, in trust issues, in innovation, indigenous knowledge that is so precious. But at the end of the day, what we must come together is that the resistances or the challenges that engaging with new ways of going forward, like the donut, can be scary in many contexts, and hence why we have reactionary groups like in politics that have been mentioned just now. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, what are the wonderful possibilities that will open up if we make space to think of new ways where the majority of the people, like in the global South, like in the whole South America and around the world, can engage and join those tables. And so I would leave you with that intention, is that rather than focus on the negative and the scaremonger and all that, why not we just join younger generations who are pulling through without worrying about what the top down is saying. They're just showing us amazing richness in what can be done from the bottom up. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Carolina, for this. This was really wonderful. There's so much that we can do with our students. There is so much excitement, so much anxiety, and also so much desire from our students to change the status quo, to change what is happening right now in the world. So I hope this we can work with this to help our students be more productive. They can think in other ways about our current situation. Well, time is running out, so I'm just going to give a closing argument to this. I don't know, Alejandra, if you want to go first? No? Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Kate Raworth for her time, for her wonderful lecture. So I just prepared to close this the following. In closing, Kate Raworth's Donut Economics stands as a beacon of hope and guidance in a world facing profound challenges. Her work transcends the traditional confines of economic theory, urging us to reimagine prosperity within the boundaries of our planet's capacity and the fundamental needs for all individuals. As we confront the urgent realities of climate change, ecological degradation, and social inequality, Raworth's insights compel us to shift not only our economical paradigm, but our mental models, our worldviews, our assumptions. By embracing a regenerative and distributive economic model, we have the opportunity to forge a future where human well-being flourishes without compromising the health of our planet. It is a call not just for change, but for a profound and necessary transformation, one that invites us all to actively participate in building a more sustainable and equitable world for generations to come. Kate Raworth's vision challenges to transcend the status quo and collectively pave a path towards flourishing and balanced global society. At Tecnológico de Monterrey, we are committed to addressing the climate crisis. We understand the need for disruptive thinking to face the present crisis, For this reason, this keynote lecture is crucial for us to open perspectives, to question paradigms, and to invite radical thinking, radical change in sustainability that we require right now. So in closing, let us heed the call for donut economics. Let us envision a world where economic progress harmonizes with social justice and environmental stewardship. The time for change is now. Together we can embark on a transformative journey towards a sustainable and inclusive future. I hope this is a beginning of a collaboration with Professor Raworth and her team to implement new ways of thinking in our particular context. And finally, I just would like to thank very much Ana Laura Santamaria and Cátedra Alfonso Reyes for, first of all, for inviting Kate Raworth, and for us to invite Alejandra and myself to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much, Ana Laura. Thank you so much, Professor Raworth. I hope everyone has enjoyed this lecture. And with this, I hand over to Ana Laura for the closing. Thank you so much, Professor Raworth. Thank you so much, Carolina. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you so much.